The garage bay doors stood open to the evening heat, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across oil-stained concrete. Colonel James Harrington's boots struck the floor with military precision as he entered, metals gleaming on his spotless uniform, jaw tight with urgency. 3 armored personnel carriers sat silent, broken, and deployment was 48 hours away. His eyes swept the maintenance bay, searching for solutions, finding only one man. Thomas Brennan, 78 years old, knelt beside a toolbox older than most of the equipment in the room. His coveralls were dark with grease, his movements careful, deliberate, slowed by arthritic hands that had forgotten how to hurry. The colonel's frustration erupted before introductions could happen. "This is what they give me? I need a fleet combat ready by Thursday, and they sent me a museum exhibit when I need a miracle." Tommy looked up slowly, his weathered face showing nothing, not anger, not shame, just the quiet resignation of a man who'd heard worse. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen 1,000 shifts. "I'll see what I can do, sir." The colonel's laugh was sharp, dismissive, already turning away. It echoed off metal walls as he disappeared through the doorway, leaving Tommy alone under lights that hummed like distant engines. Surrounded by machines younger men couldn't fix, Tommy Brennan arrived at the base before sunrise every morning, his truck the only civilian vehicle in the parking lot when the first light broke over the fence line. The colonel's laughter from the night before still rang in his ears, but morning came regardless. It always did. He clocked in without ceremony, brewed coffee no one else would drink, and disappeared into the maintenance bay while the world was still dark. By the time the younger mechanics arrived, loud, caffeinated, clutching energy drinks, he'd already been working for 2 hours. They rushed past him like he was part of the equipment, a fixture, invisible. At noon, Tommy sat on an overturned crate in the corner, opening a metal lunchbox with a faded Marine Corps sticker peeling at the edges, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, a thermos of water. He ate alone while the others gathered outside, laughing about weekend plans, talking about people he'd never meet. The base commander tolerated Tommy for one reason. He was reliable, cheap, and never complained. A budget line item that fixed things quietly. His apartment was 15 minutes away, a 1-bedroom with bare walls and clean floors. One photograph sat on the mantel, a young Marine in dress blues, eyes bright with something that looked like hope. The face was unrecognizable as the old man who lived there now. No family called, no one visited, just the rhythm of work, microwave dinners, and sleep that came early because there was nothing else to stay awake for. Back in the garage, Tommy worked differently than the others. No computers, no diagnostic tablets. He listened to engines the way some men listen to music, hearing what was wrong in the irregular rhythm. He placed his palm against metal, feeling vibrations that told stories the machines couldn't read. The younger techs noticed, mocked it behind his back. "Gramps probably fixed Jeeps in World War II, one said, grinning. Tommy heard it, said nothing, just wiped his hands and returned to the engine that needed him. After hours, he stood alone in the empty bay, tools put away, floor swept clean. In the distance, the training grounds echoed with marching cadences, sharp, rhythmic, alive. A world that had moved on without him. Morning arrived with crisis. Colonel Harrington returned to the maintenance bay with his command staff trailing behind. 3 officers with clipboards and tight expressions. The 3 armored personnel carriers still sat motionless, their mechanical failures deepening from problem to catastrophe. 48 hours until deployment. 48 hours to fix what the base's most advanced diagnostic systems couldn't even identify. The younger mechanics surrounded the vehicles like surgeons over a dying patient, tablets glowing with contradictory data, error codes that made no sense. Panic had replaced confidence. The colonel's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I need answers. Now. Careers are on the line here, starting with yours." He pointed at the head mechanic whose face had gone pale. Desperate, the man offered the only option left. "Sir, the old guy, Brennan. He might know these older model systems. He's been around since..." "Fine." The colonel's agreement came with a sneer. "Get him. But this is our last option before I bring in contractors and explain to command why my entire maintenance team is incompetent." Tommy arrived 10 minutes later, still wiping sleep from the corners of his eyes. He moved to the first carrier, kneeling with effort, pressing his ear against the engine housing. The colonel hovered above him like a storm cloud, arms crossed, jaw working. "This is what happens when we don't enforce retirement ages." The comment landed in the silence. No one laughed. Tommy said nothing, just moved to the second vehicle, his hands tracing fuel lines, testing connections the computers had already cleared. "I need solutions, not someone who needs help reading the manual," the colonel continued, his voice rising with each passing minute. Tommy requested a specific torque wrench, an older model. The colonel's eyebrows lifted. "That's not in the repair protocol." Tommy asked for access to the hydraulic system. "That's not how we do things anymore." Every request was questioned. Every movement doubted. The younger mechanics shifted uncomfortably, caught between instinct and authority, watching a man being dismantled in public. Then Tommy found it. A pressure valve issue buried deep in the system, something modern diagnostics would miss because they weren't programmed to look for it. He explained the solution. A manual bypass, temporary but effective, using technique over technology. The colonel stared at him like he'd suggested using a horse and buggy. "A manual bypass? That's primitive, outdated." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "I don't have time for guesswork from someone who should be in a retirement home. I need real mechanics with real training, not—" He gestured at Tommy with disgust. "Not this." The order came sharp and final. "You're off this job. In fact, you're done here entirely. I'll have your access revoked by end of day." The humiliation was surgical, public, complete. Tommy set down his tools with hands that didn't shake, nodded once, slowly, like a man who'd learned long ago that some battles aren't worth fighting, and turned toward the exit. The garage had gone silent. As he passed the youngest mechanic, the kid whispered, barely audible, "Sir, he might actually be right." The colonel's glare silenced him instantly. Tommy kept walking. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. His footsteps echoed, and then he was gone. Evening settled over the base like a weight. Colonel Harrington sat alone in his office, the silence broken only by the clock on the wall, counting down hours they didn't have. The armored carriers remained broken. The deployment deadline loomed. His mechanics had tried everything the manual suggested, everything the computers recommended. Nothing worked. Pride was expensive, and he was paying the bill. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Major Sarah Chen entered without waiting for permission, a personnel file clutched in her hand. Her expression was strange, careful, like someone carrying something fragile. "Sir, about the mechanic you dismissed this morning. I did some background checking because something didn't add up. His hiring paperwork had a DD-214 attached." She placed the document on his desk. The colonel barely glanced at it, exhaustion making him dismissive. "So he was military. Lots of vets work civilian jobs. What's your point, Major?" But Chen didn't leave. "Sir, his service dates, 1965 to 1968. Vietnam." She paused, her finger pointing to a line near the bottom. "And there's a notation I've never seen before. A classified operations reference number." Now he looked. Really looked. Thomas J. Brennan, United States Marine Corps. The dates were there, but the details were sparse, sections blacked out, redacted by someone with authority he didn't have. Something cold moved through his chest. Curiosity. Maybe something worse. "Pull everything you can find from the military archives. Whatever access level you need, use my authorization." Major Chen nodded and disappeared. Across town, Tommy sat in his apartment, the silence different from the garage, heavier, older. The photograph on the mantel stared back at him. That young Marine in dress blues a lifetime ago. A different man entirely. He closed his eyes and the sounds came unbidden. Jungle canopy rustling. Helicopter rotors beating the air like a frantic heart. Mud and blood in the face of a boy, himself. Terrified but determined. Holding tools and shaking hands while the world exploded around him. His hand trembled as he poured 2 fingers of whiskey he wouldn't finish. Midnight. Major Chen returned to the colonel's office carrying a manila folder marked with security classifications in red ink. Her face had changed entirely. Shock, reverence, something like awe. "Sir, you need to read this. All of it." Harrington opened the folder. His expression shifted. Irritation first, then confusion. then something approaching disbelief as his eyes moved across the first page. The words didn't make sense, couldn't be real, but they were. Dawn broke through the office windows in shades of gray and gold, but Colonel Harrington hadn't noticed the night ending. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. The folder lay open before him like an accusation. Pages spread across his desk in a pattern that told a story he could barely force his mind to accept. Coffee had gone cold in a mug he didn't remember pouring. His eyes burned from reading and rereading words that refused to become less devastating with repetition. The first document was an after-action report dated November 1967, written in the clipped military language that tried and failed to contain the chaos it described. Corporal Thomas J. Brennan, combat engineer attached to Marine Force Reconnaissance, operating deep in enemy-controlled territory in Quang Tri Province. His specialty wasn't simply fixing equipment that had broken down in safe rear positions. It was keeping impossible missions running under conditions that would have broken most men before they even began. The report detailed an operation that had gone catastrophically wrong when their extraction helicopters took sustained small arms fire during a hot landing zone evacuation. 3 birds disabled, 47 wounded Marines trapped on the ground. Classified intelligence that couldn't fall into enemy hands. 22-year-old Tommy Brennan had spent 4 hours under continuous enemy fire repairing those helicopters with whatever he could salvage, improvising solutions with tools that weren't meant for the job and parts that came from cannibalized wreckage. He worked while bullets tore through metal around him, while men died waiting, while the jungle itself seemed to be trying to swallow them whole. The report noted, almost as an afterthought, that Corporal Brennan sustained 2 gunshot wounds during the repairs, one to his left shoulder, one grazing his ribs, but refused medical evacuation until the last helicopter lifted off, with its cargo of wounded and intelligence materials secure. 47 Marines came home because a kid with a toolbox wouldn't quit. Another document. This one stamped with classifications that required presidential-level clearance to fully access, described the 6 months that followed. Tommy's convoy had been ambushed 2 weeks after the helicopter incident. He'd been captured, held as a prisoner of war in conditions the report could only hint at through clinical language that somehow made it worse. Interrogation, torture, solitary, confinement in a box barely large enough for a man to exist in. The enemy knew he'd been part of classified operations, knew he carried information they desperately wanted. The report confirmed what mattered most. He never broke, never revealed operational details, never gave them anything they could use to hurt his brothers still fighting. 6 months of hell, and he held the line. The final document sat on top of the others, and it was this one that made the colonel's hands begin to shake. A Navy Cross citation, the nation's second highest military honor, 1 step below the Medal of Honor itself, awarded to Corporal Thomas J. Brennan for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. The citation detailed acts of valor that read like fiction, but were verified by multiple witnesses and commanding officers. The decoration ceremony had never taken place. Tommy had been medically evacuated and discharged before the military bureaucracy could arrange the formal presentation. The medal had been mailed to an address he'd already abandoned, lost somewhere in the chaos of a veteran trying to find his way back to a country that didn't know what to do with men like him. Colonel Harrington's face had transformed completely as he read. The arrogance that had defined him yesterday had drained away, replaced by shame so profound it became a physical thing. His shoulders curved inward. His jaw clenched against something that might have been nausea or grief or both. Major Chen stood near the door, watching him process what she'd already absorbed hours earlier. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet with the kind of gentleness reserved for delivering unbearable truths. "Sir, there's more you should know." After the war, he struggled. Severe PTSD that went largely untreated, because the VA system was overwhelmed, and he didn't know how to ask for help. No family support. His parents had died while he was captured, and he came home to nothing. He bounced between jobs for decades, couldn't hold anything steady. The VA flagged him as high risk multiple times. This job at the base, this mechanic position? She paused, making sure he understood. It's probably all that's kept him stable. It's probably what's kept him alive. The colonel closed the folder with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow, emptied of everything that had made it commanding just 24 hours before. I called him a museum exhibit. The words hung in the air like smoke from something burning. I told him he belonged in a retirement home. I had him removed from the base. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound like something breaking. He grabbed the folder, holding it against his chest like evidence he couldn't afford to lose. His eyes found Major Chen's, and in them was something close to desperation. Where is he? Find him. Now. Early morning found Tommy back at the garage as if yesterday's humiliation had been just another shift in a long line of them. He needed the job. Pride was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. So he swallowed what remained of his dignity and returned to the only place that had given him purpose in recent years. His hands moved through familiar motions, organizing tools, checking inventory, preparing for a day that would likely be his last on the base. He expected the termination paperwork by noon. The sound of boots on concrete made him look up. Colonel Harrington stood in the doorway, and the entire garage seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Every mechanic stopped mid-motion, wrenches suspended in air, conversations dying on lips, all of them sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. The colonel moved forward slowly, almost carefully, holding a manila folder against his chest like it contained something sacred or fragile or both. When he spoke, his voice was unrecognizable from the one that had filled this same space with contempt just yesterday. The command authority had been stripped away, leaving something raw and almost breaking underneath. Mr. Brennan. He paused, correcting himself with visible effort. Sir, I owe you an apology that words can't possibly cover, but I'm going to try anyway. He opened the folder with reverent hands, turning it so Tommy could see the documents inside, the after-action reports, the citations, the evidence of a life the old man had left behind decades ago. I didn't know who you were, what you'd done, what you'd sacrificed. But that's not an excuse, and I'm not offering it as one. I judged you based on nothing but my own arrogance. I disrespected you in front of your peers. And I was completely, catastrophically wrong. Tommy looked down at the papers, and for a moment his weathered face became a map of complicated emotions. Pain that never fully healed. Memories that refused to fade. And something that looked like bone-deep weariness. His voice, when it came, was quiet and measured. That was a long time ago, Colonel. Different life, different man. But Colonel Harrington wasn't finished. He needed to say all of it, needed the words to exist in the air between them. Your solution yesterday. The manual bypass for the APCs. I had my team implemented overnight after you left. He paused, and the admission seemed to cost him something. You were right. All 3 vehicles are operational now. You saved the mission. You saved careers, including mine, though I didn't deserve that mercy. Tommy nodded slightly, and there was no triumph in the gesture, no vindication, just simple acknowledgement of a fact. The colonel took a breath, and then did something that clearly cost him everything he'd built his identity upon. In front of his subordinates, in front of witnesses who would remember this moment for the rest of their careers, he extended his right hand and said words that transformed the space between command and respect into something entirely different. I would be honored, truly honored, if you would supervise the final inspections before deployment. I trust your judgment. I should have trusted it from the beginning. It wasn't just an apology. It was a public restoration of dignity, an acknowledgement of worth, a reversal so complete it rewrote yesterday's narrative entirely. Tommy looked at the offered hand for a long moment, and in that silence the younger mechanics held their collective breath, witnessing something they instinctively understood was rare and important.